Hi, I'm Leo Knight in Tellerico, and today is January 17th, 2013. We're going to take a look today at year 2013, an astrology forecast for the year 2013. And I can tell you that I've been doing astrology professionally for about 28 years now. And this year coming up, 2013, in fact, from spring 2013 to spring 2014, looks like one of the most important years that I've seen in a long time. And we'll get into exactly what that year is going to look like. But first, I want to give a bigger picture so we can put this year into context. You know, astrology is about cycles. And of course, like there's a lunar cycle, there's a new moon, becomes a full moon, back to a new moon again. We're talking approximately 28 and a half days that cycle happens. The sun does a yearly cycle. It starts in one sign, beginning of the year, a certain year, and then comes back to that same sign again. And all the different planets have their own cycles. Mercury about a year, Venus a little over a year, Mars about a year and a half, Jupiter 12 years, Saturn 28 and a half years, Uranus 84, Neptune and Pluto, we're talking about 150 years approximately, a little less, a little more, depending on the year. So astrology is about cycles. So one of our biggest cycles to look at in astrology is the changing of ages. And an age is 2,160 years. And right now, we are in a transition between an old Pisces age and a burgeoning, growing, becoming Aquarian age. And if you want to take a look at when this Pisces age started, it started about the time that the Roman Empire was powerful and that the Christ was born. And so we had an empire and we had the beginning of a new kind of spirituality. And what that Pisces age has been a growing of nation building on the one hand, which have turned into empires, and a growing of churches, organized churches, which start from some kind of a savior or a messenger. So we've had Christianity and Islam are the ones that we can point to over these last 2,000 years. Never has there been anything like that in known history of churches that became that big to span the globe as Islam and Christianity have. So now we come to the end of the Pisces age. Let's say we're in transition. We're on the very last part of the cusp as we move into this new Aquarian age. I believe that the cusp was just being met. Just the beginning of the cusp moving into the Aquarian age was at the end of the 18th century. At that time, in 1781 exactly, the planet Uranus was discovered. Uranus is the planet that rules Aquarius. Prior to 1781, the planet that was furthest out known by humanity was Saturn. And so that was considered the god of all gods up until that time. And when you look at what Saturn represents, Saturn is like authority figures. It's like the patriarchy. It's like the old God from the Old Testament that says this is the way it is, and everyone is going to obey these rules, obey these commandments, and do things in a certain kind of way. Well, when Uranus was discovered in 1781, things began to shift. Something was seen beyond the God that everyone thought was the greatest God, which was Saturn. Remember, as above, so below is a spiritual principle that explains astrology to a large extent. So Uranus was discovered, and what was going on around 1781 were the American Revolution and the French Revolution. And what did they represent? They represented moving beyond kings and queens, moving beyond authority figures, and having humans determine what their own fate is going to be. That was the beginning of the Aquarian age. Liberation from the authorities, equality of all humanity, self-determination for all of us, and a feeling that we had certain God-created rights as individual human beings. That was 1781. There have been two more outer planets that have been discovered since then. 1846 Neptune, 1930 Pluto. So to me, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are like the emissaries, the messengers of this new age to bring us beyond the control by governments, dictators, kings and queens, presidents, and to give the power to we, the individual people. In Neptune, when it was discovered in 1846, Marx had just put out his Communist Manifesto. That was in relation to now we have big money, the Industrial Revolution taking over, and it was about the rights of the individual people during this takeover by big moneyed peoples. And then in 1930, when Pluto was discovered, that was the year that Gandhi stood up against the British Empire. So again, you could see when all of these transpersonal planets were being discovered, transformational planets, that we human beings were in the process of breaking out of our shackles and realizing that this world belongs to us. And that so much is what the Aquarian Age is. One more thing about these outer planets. When they make relationship to one another, that is when a big spike in transformational energy into this new age happens. I'll give you some examples. Uranus and Pluto made a conjunction. That's when their cycle with one another starts. And their cycle is like 130, 140 years. When it's conjunct, that starts a whole new cycle. So in 1965-66, Uranus was conjunct Pluto. What did that bring on? That brought on the 60s revolution. In 1993, Uranus was conjunct Neptune. What did that bring on? The internet revolution. So you can see when these outer planets make conjunction with one another, we get closer and closer to this new Aquarian age. The 60s broke down a lot of the old barriers of having some authority figures controlling our lives. It opened up civil rights. It opened up not having wars anymore that are determined by wealthy people telling us that we're supposed to get in wars that have no meaning to us. When the Uranus-Neptune conjunction happened and the internet began, again, that gave more freedom to humans. We can now connect with one another, share information with one another, and there's no central control yet, and hopefully there won't be, over that internet. So when these outer planets make a relationship with one another, like I said, we get a spike into going further into this new Aquarian age. So what's happening now? What's happening now is, remember Uranus, Pluto, so the 60s revolution came on? Now Uranus is square Pluto. And we can look at the range of that time from 2010 to about 2017 is when it'll have most of its influence. Now I'll get into that in a second because that's really pertinent for our year ahead that we're going to be talking about. But first, let me also say that Jupiter and Saturn were the furthest planets out before we had all these three transformational planets discovered, right? So they were considered important, and their cycle's 20 years. So every time that they meet in a conjunction, we have like a shifting around what our world, our society is going through. And it's funny because we astrologers have tracked Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions going back, way back. And in America, starting in 1841, all the way to 1981, every time Jupiter and Saturn made conjunction, whoever was president of the United States at that time died while in office. Track it back yourself. Every single time. In most recent times, that meant JFK, or President Roosevelt, died in office in his last term. And John Kennedy was assassinated in his term. Then, 20 years later, Jupiter-Saturn conjunct again was when Reagan was president. He escaped it. He made it through. He almost became a part of that same cycle of Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions. And then in 2000, it stopped. It did not happen in 2000 anymore. Bush was president at that time, and during his term of office, he got to stay in office. But nevertheless, you can see that when there's a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, it's like a new 20-year cycle that begins. Now let's look at that last Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in the year 2000. Something important, of course, happened that year too. That was the year that we had the 9/11 disaster here in the United States, and that shifted our society at that time. I looked at the actual signature of that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction back in 2000. By signature, I mean what were all the planets at that time in a chart I could make for the moment that Jupiter was conjunct Saturn. And at that time, with Jupiter-Saturn conjunct in Taurus, square Uranus in Aquarius. So what that told me was that the next 20-year period from 2000 to 2020 was going to be Jupiter-Saturn in Taurus. Those of you that know Taurus and astrology a little bit, you know, it digs in, it doesn't move, it doesn't make change very easily. Uranus in Aquarius. Uranus, remember, that's the planet of Aquarius. So it's strong in Aquarius. So at that time, it was a conflict between digging into the old world, keeping it, not changing, versus waves of strong change to bring in a new age. In the first 10 years of that 20-year cycle, most of that time, George Bush was president. And you know, those of you that follow this, that there was a digging in of the old world to keep the old fear-based, me against you consciousness in place. Now we're in the second half, and things are shifting, and things are moving more toward the people again. And in my estimation, 2020, at the next Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, which will happen in December of 2020, Jupiter and Saturn will be at 0 degrees of Aquarius. To me, that's symbolic of the Aquarian age. Now it's time. Does that mean it's going to be like, oh, we're all going to say, well, it's wonderful, everything's perfect? No, but it means that we'll be able to look back in time, hundreds of years from now, and see that as a major turning point moving in to the Aquarian age. So now, let's move it to this time period that we're looking at now for our astrology forecast, this year ahead, 2013. In fact, I want to look at it as spring 2013 to spring 2014. And now we've got this Uranus square Pluto. Remember, that's the first major meeting between Uranus and Pluto since the 60s, when they were in conjunction and brought on the 60s revolution. So now they make exact aspect between 2012 and 2015. But if we look at the whole orb of it, it's like from 2010 to about 2017. So what's been happening now since they've been square to one another? Well, if you look back 2010, 2011, here's some of the, and 2012, here's some of the big things that have happened. In 2010, we had the oil spill in the Gulf. In 2011, we had the Fukushima earthquake that destroyed the nuclear plant there. We had Occupy Wall Street happened in 2011. And we had the Arab Spring happened in 2011. So let's take a look at those. You can see that most of those, the Arab Spring, Occupy Wall Street, had a lot to do with us breaking away as a human family from that which controls us. Wall Street, breaking away from the corporations. Arab Spring, breaking away from tyrannical governments that control the people in those countries. When you take a look at the Fukushima incident, to me that was a warning by the universe through an earthquake that we are building too much on this earth based on dangerous nuclear energy, whether that's nuclear power plants or whether that's nuclear weapons. It was a big warning point as to the dangers of what can happen because we've built so much around this nuclear energy. And when you look at what happened in the Gulf with the Gulf spill, to me that was another warning by the universe of our addiction to oil and what it can do to our human family if it actually spills into the ocean or if other bad things can happen. You know, so many bad things happen around this addiction to oil. I mean, so many of the wars that we have and the conflicts that we have in the world are based on our addiction to oil. I'm sure you can see that. So already in this time frame of 2010 through 2017, when Uranus is square Pluto, and when we're in the second half of this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction cycle, you can see that a lot of the energies that are coming to us are to tell us of what we need to do to make change, and letting us know that we, the people, are getting stronger and stronger as far as knowing and taking responsibility for this being our world.